Second.
All those in favor? Unanimously.
Uh,
Who votes no?
Mr. Chair, with regard to the minutes, I know you're going to talk about that next. I did review those minutes. I looked at the video of our last meeting, and there's some omissions from the minutes. I did not have a chance to prepare a document to show exactly where they are, so I would
We'll
ask that
hold
we
off on that vote for
postpone
the
that.
next meeting.
Thank you.
Presentations and recognitions, I'd like to recognize Alfred. By citizens, Kim, do we have anyone who signed up?
Good morning. My name is Melinda Tunner. Oh, this is really loud. And I live in Palmetto Hall. Residents have been concerned about the continued development in their neighborhoods. And one of the answers to that concern is the rewriting of the LMO. You've approved the first 3 phases, which seem to be the less controversial components. Now you're really getting into the hard work. Due to growing community concerns, you advanced the discussion on floor area ratio and parking standards. And now with your new proposal, you are looking to move that work as well as the remaining phases and open items until next year. I understand that you're concerned about implementing island-wide changes, as you may fix one problem, but have unattended consequences that may create new ones. But the outcome is that the community concerns that have been there for quite some time will continue to not be addressed until sometime next year, and the development will continue as is. In regard to the district planning, I think it's a great tool to create a vision for the future. And I am hoping the more streamlined process you're recommending will also reduce the number of strategies and tactics. For example, on the bridges to the Nearly Beach district, you have 11 strategies with 72 tactics listed, and each is a large project into themselves. Multiply that by the 8 districts, and that's 576 projects. Now, I get some of them are consistent across, call it 400, call it 300. How many resources, how much time, and how much capacity would it take to get that completed? I know how this process works. You identify the time frame for all the tactics, whether it's less than a year to 3, 3 to 5, more than 5, and you put it into the strategic plan. And then you add it to all the other work, and you total it up, and then you look for a way to pay for it. And you can do that by increasing the millage rate, drawing down your balances, or borrowing money. But it's not just the money to me, but it's also the capacity to be able to get all that work done. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sherry Pettigrew.
Hi. I just want to mention that the October 13th meeting was very interesting. I rewatched it. I think it's probably must-see TV for those who haven't seen it. But I was impressed in general with the committee. I was impressed with the mayor's comments. I was impressed with the questions that were asked by some of the committee members. I was impressed by the planning staff as well. And I was impressed that one of the town council members, not on the planning committee, was in attendance. All those things were new to me because I don't usually come and speak, but I'm getting more used to it now, and I was impressed. And overall, I'm very happy with the way it's going and the fact that it's going to be reviewed and revised. But I am still opposed, of course, to the FAR that's presented in the proposal amendments. The reasons for change I will bring up again in a little more detail because I'm trying not to be so repetitious in what I say every time, but the calculations are off. The reasons for change are flawed, and the impact study does not even talk about the negative impacts to the amendment if it goes through. One reason I want to bring up and highlight, because I really haven't done that before, is the often mentioned 3 FARs that exist for holiday homes, Forest Beach and Folly Beach. Just to bring up the fact that these FARs were put in due to the citizens' request because the homes were built out, the neighborhoods were built out a long time ago, right? 50s, 60s, early 70s. So these homes were 40 to 60 years old. And then people were coming in, tearing down the homes and building these big, higher density homes. And I get that. But the way it's happening now, and I'm sure it's going to be changed, I have confidence in that. But the way it is now, that the newly developing neighborhoods are the ones not completely built out, the reverse happens. So if I can't build a house that's, 1/3 the size of my neighbor's home, which my property would be the same as the property size I was brought out last time. But if I can't build a house in line in general, then I'm not allowed to build a home in the character of my developing neighborhood. So, you've got the reverse. That was the unintended consequences, just one that was mentioned just a second ago. So to that, I would just say that, it's become obvious that the rental homes, I think, are pretty much the problem, these big gargantuan homes and the parking around these homes. So I just think that there could be a way to address that without adversely impacting those in developing neighborhoods who haven't yet built. Thank you.
Daniel Anthony.
Morning, y'all. Daniel Anthony, Jonesville Road. Speaking about the FAR and the parking on the 4A, I understand why the FAR will not work as a blanket statement for the island. But however, I don't see a problem with the parking. Nobody has said anything to me. I put inquiries out. I've emailed all of you. I've emailed staff. Nobody can tell me why the parking on 4A is not a good idea. I think that needs to be sent through now to give these residents in these communities just a sense of a little bit of security moving forward until we get the FAR figured out. But that's my statement for you all. I wish you all would consider that.
Thank you.
And our last one, William McNeil.
Hi, Bill McNeil, resident of Hilton Head. I'll keep it short. I think the general point I want to make is, each community is different here, and picking a blanket decision across the island is a really tough thing to do with all the different aspects that go in from Jonesville all the way down to Burke's Beach area. And I think picking, one FAR ratio that goes island-wide needs to take into consideration of, are you in a flood zone or you're not in a flood zone? What is included within that description of FAR, and how you're going to apply it to different communities. Do they have their own rules, governance that address a lot of the issues that you guys are trying to accomplish? And I understand it. Definitely not opposed to, putting mega mansions on, a 4,000 square foot lot. But I think, for my own personal interest and to develop my own piece of property, I just want a reasonable amount of leeway to be able to do that within respect to all the other homes that are within my development, which I think is fair from that point. Good luck on your decision process, and thank you. I'll keep it real short.
Thank you, sir. There are no more? Okay, thank you. Unfinished business, presentation of discussion of the creation of Hilton Head Island District Plans and Land Management Ordinance. Missy Buick, for planning. Morning, Missy.
Good morning. Thank you for having me again. Missy Lewick, Director of Planning. I am going to go over both district planning and the LMO amendments, but wanted to title this update today on growth management strategy, just to back up and talk about where this strategy and these projects came from, and really just start from there. I think some of the purposes of today's discussion are to both discuss the updates on those two major projects, also talk about the reorientation and direction of where staff is recommending that we go for the delivery of both of these projects, and again, discuss its alignment with the overall growth management strategy. So again, from the adopted strategic action plan, this project was identified as a priority project within the strategic action plan adopted by council in this year. And it's a large project to be accomplished in just 12 steps that are identified here. Obviously, those components that are within this strategy are very large projects in and of themselves. And the project is identified as a very comprehensive project that builds upon work as you go through it. And I'll walk through a little bit of each of these steps and components, and then we'll dive further into districts and LMO that are components of the growth management strategy. But of course, the growth management strategy, its purpose and intent is to be that blueprint for the future community and island, and identify that preferred future and enable that preferred future can be implemented or realized through the creation of district plans, through the future land use map, the zoning map amendments, the overhaul to the land management ordinance, and then the development review program enhancements, alignment with our capital improvement strategy to implement those recommendations that are identified. So again, the anticipated outcome of the growth management strategy is that the future built environment for the island is respectful of the community's core values, respects island character, and provides a renewed vision for the community's future. So a little bit about how this was identified to be accomplished within the strategic action plan. Was that first we were going to build from a conditions and trends assessment, then establish a growth framework map, identify those district boundaries, then create and adopt district plans, and so on and so forth as identified here. So the first 4 items then would be buttoned up into an island-wide master plan, which is it consolidates the big ideas and recommendations from those district plans, and then items 1.6 through 1.12 and 0.12 are how you implement that vision. So again, that island master plan would provide that strategic overview, and then what we're doing with the LMO overhaul is a main implementing arm of that island-wide master plan and the district plans that were identified, among with other implementation strategies that are identified. So the conditions and trends assessment is one that we have been working on with our consultant team for some time. Some of the statistics have been pulled out in some of the draft plans that have been presented to the Public Planning Committee. And this plan provides trend statistics and key data points on 10 topic areas. Those include demographics, workforce, economics, real estate, environment, housing, governance, community systems, and land use. The land use evaluation includes identification of properties that are susceptible to change, as well as a build-out analysis based on our current zoning and entitlements. So all of this information and conditions and trends is what the growth management strategy, district planning, and all of it is built upon. We have received the 3rd version of this, and we anticipate that this report will be ready to present to the Public Planning Committee in December or January, so real soon. And I think you'll find the information to really be that baseline from which we're building from for all of this work that's included in this comprehensive strategy. So then overall, of course, this strategy and its vision, of course, is to first build from a growth framework, which we have identified as a conservation and growth framework. And we have brought that before the Public Planning Committee and reviewed that along with the 8 district boundaries. And those are kind of the first building blocks for then getting into the meat of the discussion, which is the district planning. And that district planning is to provide a high level of a guide for land uses, intensities, and investments to achieve that district future or that theme and character of that district. And then again, we were going to establish this overall implementation strategy, which is threaded within the growth management strategy and its implementation steps. So I wanted to first walk through just that high-level overview of where these two projects sit within the overall growth management strategy, just to serve as a reminder that this is a high-level planning exercise. The district planning is meant to be like above the tree line, if you will, from some of the strategies and tactics that are identified. And then we'll talk about a little bit of where we're headed with somewhat of a redirect on the implementation for these plans. But also wanted to just kind of go through some of the history throughout this year that we've been working with the Public Planning Committee on, and that we have come to the Public Planning Committee many times to discuss these projects and have reviewed those, the district boundary map that's on the screen, the prioritization of the 8 planning districts, as well as the conservation and growth framework map, which serves as that initial first high-level prioritization of where we would consider areas for conservation and consider areas for growth in this overall strategy. So, of course, we're working on the district planning exercise, and we have brought 2 draft plans to the Public Planning Committee. The Marshes District was presented in July, and the Bridge to Beach was presented in September. And both of those draft plans were preliminary, and they included analysis and recommendations. Since then, I guess, why are we proposing that we're pivoting was one of the questions I wanted to address. One, the district plans that we had been presenting were becoming very lengthy documents, over 100 pages, and they were difficult to present and digest, even in a meeting, and maybe had too many strategies and tactics. It was a full laundry list of things that we would already have included in just how we do our everyday business and items that we would have already included, say, in a capital improvement program schedule. And so they were not high level or focused on those visionary components that are required for the transformation or that correct district character and theme that is intended. And also the pace for delivery of these documents was proving to be, it was going to take a lot more time than what we had anticipated for the project timeline. And so we worked within the last 30 days to come up with a different strategy to make sure that we're meeting the intent and purpose of the district planning as it relates within the overall growth management strategy, and also identified ways that we could streamline, still have the important community conversations on how each district is to be envisioned for its future, and then identify those key strategies and tactics based on a SWOT analysis of each district, and then high-level recommendations to achieve that preferred future. So that was a little bit of the thought process on why we are recommending a streamlined approach, and then the next couple of slides go through what that streamlined approach could look like. So the first step that we've identified is a SWOT assessment of each district. So what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? And we've done that among the staff team, as well as the chair of Public Planning Committee joined us for one of these planning days to do just that. Each district has a preliminary SWOT analysis, and we also pulled some key statistics and data points as background information. And also, we're pulling from that draft land use chapter from the conditions and trends analysis to identify some land use vulnerabilities that would be important for consideration of those SWOT assessments. Then we are aiming to answer 4 key questions for each district. So who does that district serve? What are those unique characteristics? What needs to be preserved or protected? And then what should we consider to activate in each district? Then we wanted to make sure that we had a strong alignment to our comprehensive plan and the plan elements. And so we'll align all of the components within the SWOT assessment with our comp plan elements, so cultural resources, natural resources, population, housing, community facilities, economic development, land use, transportation, parks and recreation, priority investment, and resilience. And then we were to identify what of those opportunities that were identified in the SWOT assessment are the pivotal ones for the intended future. So what are those that, if that district is one that would experience some consideration for change, that are pivotal for that future or that intended future to take place? And then also on this slide, some of the document delivery, the word template is used in each of these items, in that we want to create uniform delivery of all of the delivery of the districts, from the presentation to the community survey to how we do public engagement, as well as how the documents are formatted. And so we're working right now with a consultant team to identify what components would need to be in a presentation deck to deliver to the Public Planning Committee and in the community. And then what then from those key questions that we're asking of the Public Planning Committee would we also incorporate in a community survey? And then likewise also take into that public engagement strategy. So whether it's stakeholder engagements, we intend to have meetings in each district. What does that look like? How do we establish that? And how do we make sure that it is a uniform approach in all of the districts? And then also creating a document that doesn't exceed 25 pages or so. We're thinking of a format similar to the housing framework, in that it is very high level for each district and just includes what needs to be in there. And we can refer back to other documents such as the conditions and trends assessment, such as the comp plan or other plans that have been reviewed and approved by the town as some of the support materials for those district plans. And so it would reduce the amount of content that needs to be in the plan documents themselves. And then we wanted to incorporate a high-level one-pager, like an 11 by 17 document that would be a summary document. It would be an infographic style document that would be a templated document as well for each of the districts. And with that streamlined approach, we talked about with our consultant team how we could deliver approach like that and when we could accomplish all of that with delivery of 8 districts to Public Planning Committee. And we believe that that can all be accomplished within Q1 or Q2 of 2024. And so I just wanted to open it up and see if there are any questions about at least this particular pivot and how we're approaching district planning and the deliverables and how we present both to you and the community of where we're headed with this project.
Well, thank you very much. I always appreciate the staff's work, and especially when rethinking is involved, if you will. I'm concerned about several things, but I also have some questions. First of all, where's the Planning Commission in this process? I don't see the Planning Commission listed as part of the process.
Well, when district plans are going through review and approval, that would be part of the public process that would take place. We're working through getting these district plans completed and at a level where the public process could begin.
It would be during number 4 district plan public engagement?
It could be in that step, or it could be after those steps are complete and we're ready to move through the formal public process that then would include approvals by a recommendation by the Planning Commission and other bodies that might need to be recommending bodies as well. And then ultimately through to town council.
And the other two I was going to ask about is Design Review Board and the Gullah Geechee Land and Cultural Preservation Task Force. And you know, maybe even the Housing Action Committee. We have other boards and commissions that I think are integral to this process, and they're not included in this, so I think they need to be included in this process.
And your preference is they're included in step 4?
I would say a separate step, because I see the public engagement as being the community meetings where the public gives us input, similar to what's done in a comprehensive land use plan. And I don't see that. I think our boards and commissions review is separate from that and needs to be a separate step. You know, I haven't carefully thought through where it should be, but I think those boards and commissions could gather information from public engagement. So perhaps between 4 and 5 should be a new 5, and then make 5, 6, and 6, 7. But I think there's some important boards and commissions that are not a part of the process.
Okay.
The other thing is that I appreciate the optimism of the timing. And this is the district plans, so we're not even talking about the other parts of the process where you look, and I know you have another part of the presentation with regard to LMO amendments, but rewriting a whole land management ordinance or unified development code is time consuming, first of all, from the drafting itself. Secondly, the public input part of it. And thirdly, when you put the maps up, that's where the rubber really meets the road. And it's a time-consuming process. I'm also concerned because we already have previous town council adopted a Mid-Island district plan of 126 pages. So is that also going to be rewritten?
It will be redrafted within this templated format, yes, but the key components that are included in that adopted plan would be carried through.
Okay, all right. And while I appreciate the streamlining, maximum of 25 pages, I'm probably okay with that, assuming that there might be some appendices that you could look at with more detail. The housing framework is nice, but it's a great framework, but it's like, I can't even compare it to something. It's like if you're going to frame a quilt and you build the frame, but the quilted pieces have to come together and take a lot more time. So I think that to shoot for something that small does not reflect all the work that has been done previous to that. I'm all about trying to reduce the size of the documents. Reading is not my favorite pastime, but I read what I need to. So I think it's a bit ambitious to try to do that, especially for something that is so vital to our island. If we're going to do it, let's do it right, and let's not handcuff ourselves by saying we're only going to do it a minimum of certain or maximum of certain pages. I appreciate the goal, but I think we need to think about what's involved. The other thing which concerns me even more, and that is that we have some issues now that have to be addressed. And even if you speed up this process, you streamline the documents, even if you somehow can include the community engagements that are essential and include the other boards and commissions to try to do this for all those 8 districts within the first quarter of 2024, even going into the second quarter, I just don't see that happening. I mean, I'd like to be optimistic about it. I wish we had done it this year, but we're not there. And I just, as some folks know, in my previous career, I did live through a jurisdiction twice this size in population with completely redoing the land management ordinance with a lot of public engagement. And it's important, but it's time consuming. So I think we need to be realistic about it. And I think we need to remember, and I appreciate the comments of Ms. Tunner about that there are areas right now and issues right now that we need to address. Yes, let's be careful about the whole rewrite, but let's not forget what we set out to do in January of this year.
So if I could, real quick, respond to some of that. So when we identified that we would have districts for delivery to Public Planning Committee within the first or second quarter of next year, it wasn't, and then we would start that public review process from there. So it wasn't that it was fully adopted, because adoption takes many months to run through the various boards and public review processes. And then as it relates to the land management ordinance overhaul, that is an implementation step from the districts and is on a separate timetable from the districts.
I appreciate that. I'm going to twist a little in my seat because sometimes, I appreciate that you're going to give this committee a draft document within the first or second quarter of next year for all the districts. But what am I to do with them if I don't hear from the public engagement? We hear folks who come to these meetings, and I know we listen to folks. What if we say, here's the draft district plan, no, go back and make these changes with the limited public engagement that we've had to date. So it's just I just scratched my head a little bit about that one. Where is the appropriate time to have public engagement, before or after we see the first draft of the district plan?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Missy, for your presentation. I don't know where to start. I have a number of points, and I know that I want to get through them all. Some may be more appropriate now, and some may be more appropriate for the second part of this discussion. But to follow up on Patsy's comments with regard to other bodies that are commissions, et cetera, I do want to make two statements. That is important. But it's also important to recognize that we, as a body of elected officials, are the ones who make the final policy decisions. And the creation of a district plan or LMO amendments, et cetera, fall into our responsibilities as much as we listen to those other commissions and advisory committees that have been set up. Having said that, I think that an important piece that's missing is input from us as council members who represent various areas, district areas, in the same way as that we have had those types of meetings with regard to parks. We have had the opportunity, as plans have been developed, to come in and meet in small, two-person meetings, to hear those plans, to provide feedback, and to make sure that we're being heard and what we're hearing is being heard. So I think that is a critical step that's being overlooked. This is a big deal, and coming to us and to give us a general update about all the hard work that's going on behind the scenes that staff is doing leaves out that really important component. And the reason it's so important is because of things that I see in here. I'll just take what's on the screen. Possible future conditions that are pivotal to the intended future of the district. Well, where many people are concerned about their own personal distress over what might happen with their property with regard to FAR. Can you imagine, as I know I can, and people in Ward 4 can, what would happen when a district plan comes in and upsets their apple cart, where their expectation of their residential neighborhood suddenly becomes something different? We wrote that story in 2014, or others did, and then they had to retract because they made grave mistakes in terms of a residential neighborhood changing its new pivotal intended future. So I'm very concerned about that. And I look out across the island, but I look out for those areas in Ward 4 that are susceptible to wholesale change. So residential means residential. It doesn't mean something else. Intended future of the district needs to be consistent, as others will say, with regard to their own personal properties, with the intended purpose and intent currently in the LMO, which we've strayed so far from. So we need to go back to what it is that people bought their properties believing this neighborhood, this residential neighborhood meant. So red flag all over, and I've said this before, I know Sean has heard me say it, everyone has heard me say it. I have red flags all over in terms of what that really means for the residents on this island. I've heard recently in a meeting that realtors will sell a business and a residence, and that this is a commercial type area. And in fact, I have to remind them strongly that these are residential areas, and it's my intention that to remain a residential community and not flip it to a commercial community and residential second. People want to rent their houses, that's one thing, but the intent of providing a business within a residential neighborhood is the primary goal, so that you can buy or sell a $20 million home because there's a $750,000 return on investment is contrary to residents first. And that's what I will continue to represent. For instance, Mid-Island district plans, there are changes within that document to density. I'm not sure, to Patsy's point, I'm not sure that the public is fully aware of what their communities will look like in the future if they understand that density and use is changing. So those elements of public engagement, council engagement, who represents the resident, are critical. Keeping the district character and theme, who does the district serve? If it's a residential community, it serves the residents of this island. So those are a number of things that I wanted to make sure that I speak to here at this moment. But I also now want to take a second as we move into further in, is what it has been the expectation of residents since at least, though longer than this, since at least June 12th, 2020, when a document was written by staff. And the title of that document was Lessons Learned from Bradley Circle. That document was created and memorialized because of all of the issues that we now are staring us in face with regard to district planning. And just as a matter of being able to point to one piece of it specifically, last page, page 3. In addition to the changes noted above, staff also recommends that future adjustments to the LMO be considered as a result of the recent development on the island. The areas that staff recommends be considered include, but are not limited to, the following: setback encroachments, utilizing floor area ratio or FAR, and minimum lot sizes, limiting house size in single-family districts to that which meets the residential building code, requiring parking spaces in garages to be large enough both horizontally and vertically to accommodate large vehicle profiles, and the calculation of height. This is not new. This is what residents have been counting on us to do. This is what staff has been working on for 3+ years. So, just a quick reminder. We have an LMO whose purpose and intent we all bought into. We have documents from staff, long-standing, worked hard by staff. I know how hard you guys work, and this is not a criticism of that at all.
Thank you. Missy, thank you for your report. What I see here is an enormous undertaking for the town to establish these district plans. I too have been concerned about the first presentations that we saw with multiple strategies and dozens of tactics. To me, that's putting the cart before the horse. It makes perfect sense to me to come forward with a high-level look at what a district would be. That would then be presented to the Public Planning Committee and possibly also presented to the full town council, but not adopted, because that then would start the process. The process would include what Ms. Bryson has been talking about, bringing in boards and commissions, having public sessions, having public input sessions in various districts, laying out strategies and tactics based upon the input that's received at that time. So what I see happening here is, instead of asking PPC or the council to swallow the whole elephant at one time, you're offering us smaller bites so that we can understand what we're doing, and then we can move forward to develop that. What we're talking about here is a longer-term process to bring to completion, but we want to bring it to completion correctly. Would I like to have it already done? Sure I would. But it's not happening that way. And so what I see is that you and your colleagues have recognized that this is too much of an undertaking for even presentation to the council at this point. And rather what you do is you come up with a 10,000-foot strategy having to do with each district. Present that to us. We don't approve it. You present it to us, and then starts the process of public engagement, boards and commissions engagement, and final adoption down the road. So I think I understand what you're trying to do, and I appreciate what you're trying to do, because I think you're creating a more manageable problem for us to deal with. I'm no planner, you know that. And so I have to rely on your expertise about this. So it has to be presented to me in individual steps. And that's what you're offering. And I think that is the right way for us to go. And I would support that moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stanford. You essentially summarized what I was going to say.
I saw your notes earlier.
But to reiterate, I think this is going in the right direction for several reasons. One is we do have to prioritize what's most important. We have to, I believe, have the council approving a series of steps, not just one step. So what you're addressing today is sort of the global step. Early in next year, we would be saying, hey, you're headed in the right direction. That's one level of approval. There'll probably be several other levels of approvals down the road. Public input, Ms. Becker mentioned workshops. It might be interesting sometime between now and January to have a workshop of council and the public to be present, so all are talking the same language. I look at the staff as the experts, experience, skill, advise us strategies and recommendations. I don't need to know every single document that you're looking at. You have to have that in your library of information. So I'm comfortable with a scaled down presentation to us so that we can wrestle with the policy implications. I want to check something, I can go to that library, that bank, that website, wherever you're going to keep all the detailed information that you're relying on to present to us the policy opportunities. So I'm comfortable here that you've identified a sequence of approvals so that we're not trying to bite off the entire elephant at one time. Very helpful. And I also agree that the presentations at the PPC level should be high-level prioritization recommendations by staff. Not all the nitty-gritty. Specific question. Is the information that you have compiled available on the website?
Of course, the approved Mid-Island District Plan is available, and the draft Bridge to Beach and Marshes plans are on the website. The preliminary planning that we've done is not on the website just yet. As soon as we have a conditions and trends report that we're ready to share, that will be available publicly. It is very information-rich, and I think from some of the statistical analysis and background data that was in some of the prior plans, you can kind of anticipate the level of information overload you might get from that presentation as well.
I do think that public and council ought to be able to, in a sense, go to the appendix,
Oh, yeah,
find that information.
yes.
My sense is that you should be coming to PPC, highly thought out prioritization, recommendations at each level. That for the 8 districts, we're posing questions to the PPC. Are the most important things we ought to be thinking about, rather than the laundry list. The issue of timeline is a thorny one, because it's begging us to circumvent a process. I think we need to think through that and have staff consider what are the alternatives, delaying 100% or thrusting something forward, have consequences that are on my own standpoint. I rely on the prudence of a process to get us to the right decision. But I am very aware lack of, or the concern of citizens aren't addressing critical issues. So I think this is something that we at council level and also staff need to, what our alternatives are. Thoughts on that issue, we can move forward.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, could I make one more suggestion about the outline that you have up there? I know number 1 is on the previous page, you don't need to go there. But I like Mr. Stanford's idea of bringing the PPC a template, if you will, with these are the critical areas for each district. And then after that, it goes to the public engagement and all the boards and commissions. So, you know, what we might do is rework these steps. So, for instance, I'm just going to pick on number 2 there, district plan presentation as a template to PPC. And then after that, all this follows, and then it comes back to PPC before it goes to town council for adoption of the full district plans. So
Well,
adding
yeah,
2 other parts in there.
I haven't thought through this, but that might be the place where we have a workshop.
That's fine.
Right, so each process or each step, 1, 2, 3, and 4, build upon each other, and then we build that district plan document. It might be at step 5 before, that's where you do the workshop, because you've gone through a process and heard from the community, and then you've incorporated that into a document for review.
Yeah, and then either add or amend around step number 2, that a draft of templates for district plans are brought to the PPC, and then go through the rest of the process to get to the workshop and adoption.
Okay.
I can just make sure that I've heard and it's noted. A workshop is certainly a great step, but in other areas where we are deciding, for instance, parks, a workshop has come second to us being able to give our feedback to staff with regard. And I think that's important because as you started your presentation, you mentioned that there was only one of 7 council members who sat in on staff planning. That's not acceptable. Each and every one of us has the same responsibilities, not only to our constituents, but to the residents of the island and to the future of this island. And so each and every one of us should be part of those discussions.
Morning.
Mr. Chairman, committee, thank you. Sean Colin, Assistant Town Manager. Missy, thank you for letting me slide in. I was going to try to avoid it. Great feedback today. I want to let you know I believe in this process about having this initial assessment. We're really trying to inform future land use. If you look at our plan was great. The land use element was lacking. It wasn't forward thinking. It didn't have a future land use map. So this is to inform future land use. Very critical component of and setting expectations and commitment to what the future of Hilton Island will be, while maintaining those important items that came through with our plan and from the community. So what the district plan ultimately intends to do is to inform a future land use map, to inform a new, the right LMO, or maybe we'll call it something different, right? The right code for Hilton Island, and also inform our capital improvement program on where we're going to invest to be intentional to drive change. I think without doing a SWOT assessment of each of the districts, then we don't know exactly where we're starting. There's a lot of uniqueness to each one of these, and I think we need to ask committee a series of questions based on the findings of the SWOT to help define what the future options are and get alignment. Then we go to work, we add some more context, bring that to the community, ask the community those same questions, and be able to advance this in bite-size and right-size chunks to advance and bring this forward. So I think this is the right approach. I'm glad in my opinion, we're to a point where we're recommending that we do this. I think this approach will save time in the long run. Rather than bring whole district plans forward that we will debate for months before they're ready. So bring these forward based on our plan, link those to the elements and the core values in the plan, to get council input at the committee level. And then I do agree, the discussions with town council in small groups, and then the workshop has been very productive in many different initiatives that I've been involved with in the last couple of years, to make sure that we're hearing from council, getting alignment, understanding where there's commonality and some differences, and then be able to work forward with that. So thank you for your input and for consideration of this process. Thank you.
LMO updates?
So the LMO plan, obviously we have been implementing since January of this year. I'm going to briefly cover some progress to date, a little bit of a change in direction to this work program delivery, and then also ask for the PPC if you agree with the new approach. So again, just to remind you of where we came from. So we did do a SWOT analysis of our land management ordinance in January of this year, and then identified some deficiencies and strategized a plan to update the code. As you're well aware, we're implementing a 5-phase LMO amendment program, and we identified the list of areas for improvement that are identified here. It was how we administer processes, our land use and zoning, of course, residential and commercial development standards, design standards, traffic standards and regulations, signage standards, stormwater regulations, natural resource regs, sustainability incentives, and our workforce housing program. We can, I always like to start with an accomplishment. So we do have 3 phases that have been adopted, and then our phase 4 sits in legal review, and as you are well aware, phase 4A is on hold for the time being. And through all of this process, we certainly have learned a lot along the way. And also along the way, we did lose a little bit of confidence in our code writer that we had on board with the code that was written and presented to us, and we were trying to implement with the community. Also, we identified that we were advancing a piecemeal approach, and so some of these amendments came out of context with a comprehensive review and code language. And also, these amendments were taking up a lot of valuable staff resources and energy, and taking us away from some of the district planning and conditions and trends analysis projects. Last month, Sean identified how many meetings, public meetings were involved in the delivery of those code amendments that we have reviewed publicly this year. It was over 25 public meetings, and that didn't even include the Islanders mixed-use text amendment. So, so there's a lot of reasons to reconsider the delivery of the LMO amendments process. And so what we want to do is make sure we have the right code writing firm on our team to help us address the concerns of the community and write the correct code to move forward with the community. We also need to do a public engagement strategy with the code amendments, and that was something that was deficient in the process that we were implementing. And then we also want to hopefully lean on this expert code writer to help us draft that code and provide the assistance both with the statistical analysis that's necessary and give us really great examples of where these codes that they're helping us write have been applied. And also we have learned that we need to test the draft code with existing projects on our island to make sure that they will work. So we have issued an RFQ for a code writer, and we have received 4 submittals. We are reviewing those currently. We anticipate holding interviews with the finalists the week of November 27th, and that we would be under contract in the month of December with a preferred code writing firm. And we anticipate kind of a soft kickoff in December, which would be project understanding, information sharing, establishment of scope and schedule, and then an official kickoff with the team in January of next year. And of course, these 2 projects, district planning and the LMO project, are very closely coordinated. We had that relationship in the phases 1 through 4 project as well. We have even a consultant team that is our owner's rep between the 2 projects and make sure that there is cross-coordination among both the staff project leads on both projects and the consultant teams on both projects, and that will continue. But we anticipate a very closely coordinated effort among both projects, and that when we have a code writing firm on board, that they will be lockstep in that district planning process, especially understanding the public review component of that and what is being heard from the community that then can be incorporated in the code that will be written at the same time. So we're not recommending advancing additional code amendments until we have this selected code writer on board. And that's really the strategy that we have identified, and wanted to hear back from the Public Planning Committee on your thoughts.
Missy, this new code writer, have the applicants that you have they worked with the town before on our LMO?
There is a firm that has, yes.
As I look back at the rewrite that was done in 2014, previous one, and there were a lot of things now that we're suffering because that wasn't well thought out, let's say. And so I'm concerned that someone would come in with predetermined views on what should be in here. And so that previously working with the town wouldn't in and of itself disqualify someone, but we need to understand where they're coming from on that. I, for one, hate to see this delayed further. However, I think you make a strong case that it must be delayed further, and I'm willing to follow the professional advice of your team on that. But I want to emphasize that there's several factors in our community that have brought about the need for the rewrite. Short-term rental abuses. That has been a real problem. We adopted a short-term rental ordinance. It has met some of those concerns. It has not met the abuses caused by structures that are not in accordance with neighborhoods. That's been a real problem. And we've been trying to deal with that by talking about issues of FAR, and we've been talking about it in terms of issues of parking. But we don't have any decisions yet. And those abuses are continuing. The developer community is moving forward as rapid as they can because they see what's about to happen. And that's a concern to all of us. That being said, I don't want to rush and make mistakes. And so there has to be some sort of balance there in terms of how this rewrite is handled. I think the council needs to say to staff that this is a true top priority item for us to be working on. Not that that hasn't been said before, but I think it just needs to be emphasized again so that we can deal with these issues. I mean, the crazy thing of escalator density, every time I think about that, it just blows my mind that RM4 doesn't mean 4 units to the acre. Depends on the size of your lot. What? That just doesn't make any sense. And then we see the abuses that are occurring in the developer community of taking some of our remaining land and packing little tiny houses with 0 lot lines or minimum lot lines on top of each other after they've removed most of the trees on the property. Those are abuses that have got to be controlled. We need to preserve and protect what we've been calling island character. And these communities that I'm talking about that have been recently built in various areas here are not in accordance with what anyone would say is island character. They are maximizing the return to the developer, period. I don't care about what happens in terms of the character of the community and preserving what we love here. So in a lot of words, I'm saying I understand the need for this, but let's continue to make this a priority, and let's make sure that we're dealing with these issues so that we can avert more abuses as soon as possible. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you again, Missy. I'm going to go from your last page, number 13, and pick out, I've discussed land use and zoning. Obviously, I've made my comments again heard. I hope that there are red flags for the areas that I represent or represented, right? So certainly I read from June 12, 2020, a formalized commitment from the town to address certain things. 3.5 years later, we somehow haven't accomplished it. Now we're on the verge of accomplishing it, believing, as we've also heard from the committee here, that staff, we rely on you. And you have done good work, and you have brought us good information. And somehow, along the way, it has gotten derailed. So, concerns, I think you hear them. Within this same list, then, residential and commercial development standards. Well, here's an abuse, to Glenn's point, a roughly 7,500 square foot lot that a building permit has been applied for 14,000, roughly, just under 14,000 square foot home. That's an abuse, right? And it's happening every single solitary day in communities from South Forest Beach all the way through up to Jonesville. And it's because for 3.5 years, y'all have been working diligently. We've had several meetings. Yes, that's true. Some of which are not required by code. So we circle around and we do dances, but aren't necessarily required of us to get something accomplished. And then as we are on the verge of accomplishing something with a 6-1 vote, the rug gets pulled out. It's not fair or respectful to the hard work y'all have done, or for the decision of the policy decision makers who were elected to address these concerns. Other thing I see on your list is traffic standards. I want to give another example of why we need to address the traffic standards and impact studies, traffic impact studies. Neighborhoods where at one time a neighborhood, a subdivision, an approved, let's say it as it is, an approved subdivision with stormwater and infrastructure to accommodate that approved subdivision, over time changes and the density in that subdivision minimally doubles. And then you put on those residential lots, now doubled from what was the original approved subdivision. Homes that have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 bedrooms, inadequate parking, substandard aspects in accordance to the land management ordinance of intent and purpose, inadequate parking, and you look at the considerations of all those cars and people, bicycles, walkers, and the rest, and that's a disaster waiting to happen. So traffic standards, impact studies, and when things dramatically change from a doubling of a density, there ought to be an automatic, automatic box that needs to be checked. We need an impact study and how this is going to be managed. You can't have it another way. Addressing the concerns of the community, I heard as part of your presentation, and that's absolutely what we're here to do. And again, I'll refer you back to a 2012-2020 statement that was out of thin air that day. It had come at a long time of meetings and public meetings and listening to constituents across the island. I hear it from Forest Beach when I used to represent them. It's now in David's good care. And I hear it from all of the neighborhoods throughout the island. Talk about overlay districts having particular constraints already on the books. And our friend Daniel points out that one FAR may not be appropriate for every area on the neighborhood, on the island. However, there are neighborhoods with nothing. And that's where you see the extreme abuses. Even within those neighborhoods with the overlay, you see abuses, but extreme abuses. So these are important. Additional amendments. You mean amendments that have not yet come forward to town council for a vote and consideration, or amendments that are still being worked on, that have come through?
May I respond?
Oh, I'm hoping so, yeah.
Okay. Well, right now, the 4A set, we are doing additional research on right now. So we are looking at a different analysis of those highly susceptible, where the problem occurs with parking and FAR in those beach communities. And so staff is currently working on that analysis to get better data to review further and bring something back. But that's some of the additional research that we are working on currently. And we hope that we would have our code writer on board and any potential adjusted language or strategy of how to accomplish it, we could work on with them, but do understand that we are still working on it and doing additional research to make sure that we can address that question adequately, as we learn that perhaps the approach that we're pursuing with 4A maybe was not the right approach.
So having said that, and hearing your answer, that answer doesn't coincide. It doesn't take into consideration the last 3.5 years of listening to community concerns. As a highlight from today's conversation. Whether we got it right and additional research is necessary, I don't know if research is necessarily the question for me, it's conversation. Is it gross floor area, including the entire scope of the work on a particular building lot? Or is it that work pulling out some unheated square footage, allowing for areas for cars to park underneath their homes? That's a conversation. That's not additional research. And additional research is, what in my mind, is what's pushing it forward and not allowing it to continue through the process that it's already started. But if that conversation can happen and we can refine that piece of it, then I think that we ought to move as we have been and answer the question of the 3+ minimally years of community concern. And then I wonder, and I think that Glenn, you brought this up in some regard, the code writer coming in and writing code, what would the relationship then be to the district plans, as it were, right? So you have a code written, then you have a district plan that code may not necessarily correlate and become meaningful. So just a question there. And back to my point of a 7,500 square foot lot with 14,000, roughly, a little bit less, home on it. And the conversation goes further. Well, there's 3,600 feet of parking. So even if you subtract for parking, we're still talking about a 10,000 square foot home, supposedly for family use and not short-term rental. So lots of things that I want to have further discussions on, but I believe that we've taken some of this to a point where additional research isn't necessarily the answer as much as additional conversation, and that should happen amongst those of us who are policymakers and taking a vote.
Thank you. Thanks for this update. A lot of careful thought into how to address this. I appreciate that. And having written some code in my day, I know it's good to have a consultant to help you out, but there are some things I think we can go ahead and do and not wait on a code writer. But before I address that, let me say, did I have a question and then a comment, and then a more detailed comment? Your list of areas to address, I don't see subdivision regulations separate. I'm guessing they're within land use and zoning.
Residential and commercial development standards, that includes subdivisions.
I think it's really, for me, it's really important to talk about subdivisions as a separate part of this list, even though that may be considered part of the standards. And I don't want to put a parenthesis after that, because then you'd have to list all the other standards. But because of the concerns, especially Mr. Stanford just raised them about some of the subdivisions that we have, the really small lots with giant houses on them, I think we need to see that in the list so we know it's in there. I'll just say it that way. The other thing to mention as a suggestion, I see stormwater regulations, natural resource regulations, and of course, other zoning and land use standards. And the town is in the process of contracting with a consultant or consultants to help us prepare a resilience plan. And I think that that is an important part of folding into our land management ordinance writing. And so I think we ought to include that somehow in the list. And I would recommend that staff take a look at it, if you haven't already, to the Urban Land Institute article called Reshaping the City, with the subtitle of Zoning for a More Equitable, Resilient, and Sustainable Future. And there's some great suggestions in there, and including some examples of jurisdictions that have adopted new codes based on that idea, including Norfolk, Virginia, which is very susceptible to storm surges. And so I think looking at the same time, looking at this article and suggestions, as well as what Norfolk and other places have done along the coast with regard to resilience as part of the longer code writing process. So suggestion about that. And now as to this proposal of how to proceed, I think that a lot of it is good. And I know that when we do this ordinance revision, it'll have to go back through that process I talked about before, the Planning Commission, et cetera, and the other boards and commissions that need to review it. But as far as not doing anything new now, and then to Ms. Becker's question about what about Phase 4A, which we've already been talking about, and you're indicating that the staff is doing some research, so that will be considered separately from this code writing process. Is that my understanding?
If that is the will of the PPC and town council, it certainly can be part of the process, yes.
Okay. All right. I have a suggestion on how to proceed more quickly on that. Because the crucial areas, we've been talking about them for a while. And my suggestion, and this is the reason I said the minutes are incomplete from our last meeting, is very specific suggestions on how to proceed. One is with regard to the parking. I gave 3 options at the previous meeting. And now I'm landing firmly on take it out of the LMO, those parking regulations we've been talking about, and insert it into the short-term rental regulations right now, because it will only require 2 readings by town council. It's not a part of the land management ordinance. And also the staff, as I understand it, when the previous town council considered short-term rental regulations, considered some parking requirements that were not included. So there's already been some research and suggested language. And I'd like for us to immediately, and I would ask at this point, Mayor, if you're listening, that you put that immediately on a town council agenda so that we can deal with this parking issue, because it's time we did it. And I think it's a part of the short-term regulations. And I'm, for one, ready to proceed to vote on that. So that would be in Title 10, Chapter 2, entitled Short-Term Rentals, specifically in Section 10-2-50, Regulations for Short-Term Rentals and Short-Term Rental Properties. And that is a solution that can be dealt with by use, which is use that is driving a lot of the parking concerns. So I want us to do that immediately. Secondly, with regard to the FAR, the chair mentioned specific areas, and I think that's what Ms. Lewis, you're indicating that the staff is researching, and that is, and I listened to the video, Burke's Beach, Forest Beach, Bradley Circle, Jonesville, Mitchellville, and Folly Field. And I guess that's the list you're looking at right now about what we could do more immediately than going through the district process and code rewriting process. And one that I think can be done right away, and that is Forest Beach Overlay District, which has existing FAR, an existing definition of the area to be considered that you brought to us at the last meeting. And that is to reduce that FAR from 0.55 to 0.45 right now. I mean, I don't mean right today, but I mean immediately. And that would take care of one, and then to focus on those other areas ASAP. That would be my suggestion on how to proceed. And then the rest of it can follow the outline that you described.
I would support both of those for the staff to inquire as to possible impacts that we would be, consequences, don't see at this moment. I think both of those are opportunities to solve a problem that we've been wrestling with. Lessons learned. I go back to the 2000 rewrite issue, which has been mentioned before in this meeting. Council and staff at that time determined the purpose, timeline for that effort. Not anticipate depth inquiry into in other words, it was not including the things that you are proposing to be included. And I'm a little off topic because this also relates to what we were talking about earlier in the meeting. But the point of my bringing it up now are experiencing the consequences of that somewhat superficial approach to the planning process that required much more in-depth study and research. So I think the lack of good base information, emphasis on reigniting the economy on the island, created the direction and the getting to a solution as quickly as possible. And that had a lot to do with density in certain areas without having the time to understand the impacts. So I just go back to code writing and district planning are much more complex than not be. Now, Bryson suggested reducing the FAR in Forest Beach and connecting parking to the yard permit. I'd like staff to come back to us and say, are we being short-sighted making those recommendations? Because superficially, not superficially, but intuitively, I think they make sense. So, now, Bryson also suggested other areas of emphasis. I guess my question is, what is a realistic schedule to propose FARs in each? I'm not asking you to do that today, but I think that's information that the public needs to know. I'll add parenthetically that it isn't just FAR we're dealing with, because it's site coverage, it's parking, it's mass, it's setbacks, and so on. Those are all parts of LMO solution. So I'm not sure how easy it is to jump to a single FAR in 8 districts, but I would request that staff provide the public that information. Those are my comments. Nothing else. I'll just ask, is there anybody in the public who would like to address either items that we addressed? Daniel, come on up. It's an opportunity to get some immediate feedback. I'd be interested in hearing.
Thank you, Ms. Lewick.
First of all, on as far as the districts go, okay? I hear what Missy's saying, and my argument with that has always been, when does the public get to be engaged? And it still seems like somebody is making up a template, a draft, as Glenn said, of the district. We haven't said anything about it. other than maybe the periodic things that we've emailed back and forth, but there's been no public communication. And I can speak for the residents on Jonesville and the residents in Ward 1 and Marsh's district. What we feel like is that something's going to be made up and presented to us that we have to agree with. And it's not going to be what we want. So that I would ask that process of public communication be moved up as fast as it could, so that we could give our input, so we could get what we want. After all, we live there. And that could be said for every district, okay? As far as the parking goes, and Patsy, I swear, sometimes it's either you're reading my mind or you have been able to hack into my note folder on my phone. Either way, it gravely concerns me. But the parking, I like the idea of it. The only thing that I could see as a fallback is that if you apply it to the STR permit, there's going to be people that say, well, I can't rent my unit now because I don't have the parking. So then what do we do? And my suggestion would be say, well, if you don't add the parking, you can't do it. But I don't know, that might be a real pickle, so to speak. Anyways, that's the two things I have to say. Thank you.
Jocelyn Steiger, Government Affairs Director, Hilton Head Area Realtors and the Beaufort Jasper County Realtors. I wanted to remind everyone of the conversations we were all having with the short-term rentals, which is what brought about the conversations for parking and FAR. So I've asked over and over again, please, let's get data. I mean, I commend you all for slowing this down and doing more research. But again, why don't we find out where the problem is, how big of a problem it is, if it needs to be addressed, and how. We have a mechanism now where we can collect some data and see if there are problems. What I am hearing is there are not as many problems as people thought. There is not as many short-term rentals as people thought. So we keep bringing in this short-term rental ordinance discussion around FAR and parking, yet it's supposed to be an LMO amendment discussion. So I would just ask that we get some data. I think we should all have data. And that would really, really help with the conversations. Where is the problem? How big of a problem is it? Is it widespread? What do we need to do to fix it?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for the opportunity. I just want to say I don't have a problem with what Ms. Bryson is recommending. I think it's very reasonable. And also I want to say that, it was mentioned that, why are we here now? Why now? Well, because, I didn't really realize until July what was going on. And when we tried to question our council representative, the first question wasn't like, okay, well, let's sit down and have a discussion. It was, how did you find out? So I think that was very telling, number one. Number two, I obviously am coming at from the left side that I don't want a FAR. And then you have on the other side this 0.45, very restrictive, all space, not just non-heated. I think the answer could be simplified if and it's somewhere in between, right? If I can't, I will walk away. If I can build a house using the current restrictions, the setbacks, and even a reasonable FAR, that I can build a house that looks pretty much like my neighbors, just doesn't look, like a little mini home, but looks like my neighbors. There's a solution right there. I don't want to build a 10,000 square foot house. I really want to build a 2,700 square foot house, but I can't even do that right now with where we are. But there's a middle ground here that would get you what you want when you want to not have people build 10,000 square foot heated space homes and still allow me to build a 2,700 square foot heated space home. Thank you.
So, Chair, before you,
No,
there is something proposed, no. David, you really need to be respectful of some things that need to be addressed. And the first one I'm going to address is that was an untruth statement. This, if you had been paying attention as a neighborhood, would have known, as I've said already, June 12, 2020, and that didn't come out of thin air. So it's not, how did you find out? It's been well documented and spoken about and known.
We
So,
shouldn't be
let's-
responding to the public. They were
And then
given the
current-
opportunity
I just
to
also want to
speak.
address current neighbors and home sizes. In that particular neighborhood that's being referred to, is the home that you want to build the same as your neighbor directly next door, which is 5,000 plus square feet, or the one down the street that's 10,000 square feet, or the one behind you down the street that's only 2,000 square feet? So just clarification. But to the point that you all seem to be in agreement here on the dais about with the changing the 0.55 to 0.45 in an overlay district, that is fine for them if that's the way that goes. The question I have for you is, what does that do for the overlay districts, or the neighborhoods that don't have an overlay district and no FAR to depend on? It does nothing to protect and preserve those neighborhoods. So that is a problem unless someone wants to establish a current FAR and take into consideration, as I've said before, the conversation that needs to happen with regard to, is this heated or unheated space? And if it is separated, what amount of unheated space and what categories does that unheated space add to a FAR in those cases?
I'm sorry, Ms. Becker. You stand adjourned.
Are we not making a recommendation? Was there not a request by staff for a recommendation?
We did it.
We did not. Who did it? That's not how this works. Ms. Bryson doesn't speak for the four of us.
It was a simple, we were all talking about it.
No. That's not how this works, and you know it. Shame on you, Sharon. A recommendation has not been formally made because the committee has not agreed to one. And